At 14, Leo Vance had nothing left but a torn backpack, a single $5 bill, and the freezing Ohio rain soaking through his worn-out shoes. His stepfather had just thrown him out into the dark, locking the door behind him forever. Shivering and looking for shelter, he stumbled into a county property auction where the town mayor was laughing off a burnt, collapsed shack, house number 9. The mayor yelled, "I'll hand over the deed to anyone with $5." Leo raised his hand. The whole room erupted in laughter. The auctioneer shook his head, mocking the foolish kid who just traded his very last dollars for a pile of worthless ash. Nobody believed in him. 3 weeks later, Leo was clearing the debris when his flashlight caught something under the floorboards. He broke through the rotten wood and discovered a massive, heavy iron hatch locked with chains. He cut the chains, pulled the hatch open, and what he found hidden in the deep dark below would soon turn this $5 ruin into the heart of the entire town. Before we travel back to the very beginning of Leo's incredible journey, I'd love to know where you're listening to this story right now, and what time is it in your part of the world? Drop it in the comments below. I always love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you're just starting your day, I truly wish you a wonderful and blessed day ahead. We work hard to bring these historical family legacies to life. So if you notice any details we can improve, please leave a comment to help us get better. And if these feel-good stories touch your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single miracle. Now, let's see how it all began. The heavy, icy Ohio rain felt like needles piercing through Leo Vance's threadbare denim jacket as the heavy oak door of his home slammed shut with a definitive, bone-chilling thud. The sharp turn of the deadbolt sealing his fate into the pitch-black midnight. At just 14 years old, Leo stood on the gravel driveway of his childhood home, completely alone, cradling a frayed nylon backpack that contained nothing but 3 pairs of mismatched socks, a water-damaged photograph of his late mother, and a crisp, faded $5 bill that his grandfather had tucked into his palm years ago, whispering that it was a lucky charm for desperate times. His stepfather's booming voice still echoed in his ears, a cruel and unwarranted eviction driven by bitter greed after his mother passed away, leaving Leo as an unwanted mouth to feed in a house that no longer belonged to his bloodline. Shivering uncontrollably, his worn-out canvas sneakers squelching with every miserable step, Leo began walking down the dark, winding, rural road toward the distant, flickering neon lights of the Blackwood township, his mind racing with the terrifying reality of survival as the temperature plummeted toward freezing. The wind howled through the barren November trees, pushing him toward the only brightly lit public building in the square, the old municipal town hall, where a warmth emanated from the cracked glass windows along with the rhythmic, aggressive drone of an auctioneer's gavel, seeking nothing more than a brief reprieve from the hypothermia settling into his bones. Leo slipped through the heavy rear doors, blending into the shadows of the crowded, smoky room where local land speculators and wealthy farmers were bidding on properties seized by the county for unpaid taxes. Up on the wooden stage stood Mayor Gerald Kellner, a heavy-set man with a calculating smile and a gold watch that caught the fluorescent light, alongside an auctioneer who was currently exasperatedly trying to unload a notorious piece of local blight known simply as House Number 9. Mayor Kellner banged his fist on the podium, laughing boisterously as he pointed to a grainy photograph on the projector screen showing a blackened, collapsed timber shack sitting on a desolate plot of overgrown land at the edge of the woods. A property ravaged by a mysterious fire decades ago, and widely rumored by the superstitious townsfolk to be cursed. Folks, we have tried selling this worthless pile of ash 3 times tonight, and not even the scrap metal yard wants it, Mayor Kellner shouted, his voice dripping with condescension as the crowd chuckled in agreement. The county just wants this eyesore off the books tonight. So I'll tell you what. If anyone in this room has $5 cash in their pocket right now, I will personally sign over the deed and the keys this very second just to be done with it. A wave of mocking laughter rippled through the warmth of the room, with wealthy investors shaking their heads, until a small, trembling hand rose from the very back row, holding up a single, crumpled $5 bill. The auctioneer stopped mid-breath, his gavel hovering in the air as the entire room turned to look at the soaking wet, shivering 14-year-old boy standing by the radiator. His face pale, but his eyes burning with a desperate determination. Mayor Kellner sneered, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the boy he had recently helped evict. But seeing an opportunity to humiliate the Vance name one last time while looking decisive in front of his voters, he barked. Going once, going twice, sold to the vagrant kid in the back for $5. The room erupted into a mixture of cruel jeers and disbelief as Leo walked down the center aisle, his wet shoes leaving a trail on the linoleum floor, and handed over his grandfather's last gift in exchange for a heavy brass key and a stamped piece of municipal paper that officially made him the youngest property owner in the state. Clutching the worthless deed to his chest, Leo walked back out into the relentless storm, guided by a crude map on the back of the paperwork that led him 2 miles deep into the overgrown, whispering woods where house number 9 awaited. When he finally arrived, the structure looked even worse than the photograph. It was a skeletal ruin of blackened oak beams and sagging roof shingles. Its front porch completely rotted away, looking like a graveyard monument instead of a shelter. Gritting his teeth against the tears that threatened to fall, Leo forced open the swollen, scorched front door, stepping onto the creaking hardwood floorboards as the smell of ancient ash and damp earth filled his nostrils. He used his cheap, fading plastic flashlight to survey the single room, finding a crumbling stone fireplace at the center, filled with charcoal debris and dead leaves that had drifted through the holes in the ceiling. As he cautiously walked toward the hearth to see if he could gather enough dry wood to spark a fire, his foot struck a strangely solid, unyielding object hidden beneath a thick layer of soot and decayed floorboards, producing a deep, metallic ring that echoed through the hollow foundations of the house. Intrigued, Leo knelt down, using his bare, freezing hands to frantically scrape away decades of grime and charcoal dust, uncovering a massive, heavily reinforced iron hatch embedded flush into the bedrock beneath the floor. The iron plate was intricately forged, completely untouched by the fire that had destroyed the house above it, and wrapped securely in thick, rusted industrial chains held together by a heavy padlock that bore the unmistakable, stamped emblem of a roaring phoenix. Just as Leo leaned closer to examine the lock, A sudden, violent vibration shuddered through the iron plate beneath his knees, followed by the muffled, rhythmic grinding sound of heavy, ancient mechanical gears turning deep within the earth below, causing the flashlight in his hand to flicker violently and go completely dark, plunge into the absolute suffocating darkness of the ruined shack. Leo froze as the deep, rhythmic grinding beneath the iron hatch vibrated right through the soles of his wet sneakers, sending a pulse of pure adrenaline through his exhausted body, before the mechanical hum slowly ground to a halt. The sudden silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady drum of rain against the scorched rafters and the frantic, echoing thud of his own heart. Trembling from both the biting cold and sheer shock, Leo tapped the cheap plastic flashlight against his palm until the weak yellow beam flickered back to life, its pale light dancing across the soot-covered floorboards and illuminating a fresh crack that had just split open the ancient mortar surrounding the iron hatch. Knowing he couldn't survive the night in the freezing storm without warmth, he forced his attention away from the mysterious subterranean gears and began frantically gathering fragments of dry wood from a collapsed interior wall, piling them into the crumbling stone fireplace. As he struck his last remaining match, the small flame caught a cluster of dead leaves, casting a warm, flickering orange glow across the room and revealing a tiny, glinting metallic object half buried in a pile of ash near the back of the hearth. Kneeling down, Leo brushed away the charcoal dust to find a heavy, brass pocket compass. But as he wiped its glass face clean, he realized with a jolt of confusion that the needle wasn't pointing north at all. Instead, it spun erratically before locking firmly onto a seemingly random spot on the western drywall of the shack. Just as he picked up the strange compass, a sharp, authoritative knock shattered the quiet night, followed by the heavy thud of a boot kicking the swollen front door completely open to reveal Mayor Gerald Kellner standing on the threshold, flanked by two burly county deputies whose flashlights instantly blinded the boy. "Well, look at this pathetic little rat nest," Mayor Kellner sneered, stepping inside and intentionally trampling Leo's small fire under his heavy leather boot, plunging the room back into cold shadow as he looked around with a calculating expression. "Don't get too comfortable, kid, because I just reviewed the county charter, and a minor cannot legally hold a property deed in this state without a registered adult guardian, meaning your little $5 stunt at the auction is null and void, and this land belongs back to the township." Leo stood up, his fist clenching as he defiantly pulled the stamped municipal deed from his backpack, holding it high in the beam of the deputy's flashlight as he yelled, "You signed it yourself in front of the whole town, Kellner, and I'm not leaving my mother's hometown just because you want to sell these woods to a developer." The mayor's eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice, and he signaled his deputies to step forward and forcibly remove the boy. When suddenly, a tall, broad-shouldered figure carrying a heavy iron crowbar stepped out from the dark pouring rain and stood firmly in the doorway, blocking their path. It was Silas Vance, the reclusive town blacksmith and woodworker who lived on the edge of the ridge, a man known for his silent demeanor and fierce independence, whose sudden appearance made the deputies instantly halt their advance out of sheer respect for the old man's intimidating strength. "The boy stays, Gerald," Silas rumbled, his deep voice carrying an undeniable weight as he stepped into the room, pointing his callous finger at the mayor's chest. "I'm registering as his legal guardian first thing tomorrow morning at the county courthouse. So unless you want a massive lawsuit for violating property rights on tape, I suggest you take your thugs and get off this kid's land before the storm traps your fancy truck in the mud." Realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched by the old man's sudden intervention, Mayor Kellner spat on the floor, pointing a threatening finger at Leo as he retreated into the night, warning them that this wasn't over and that he would find a way to tear this shack down by the end of the week. Silas watched them leave before turning to Leo, his stern expression softening slightly as he handed the shivering boy a thermos of hot soup and a thick wool blanket, noticing the brass compass still clutched tightly in the kid's hand. "You've got your grandfather's stubborn streak, Leo, but you need to be careful, because Kellner isn't after this land just for a resort. He knows what's buried out here," Silas whispered, his eyes casting a knowing, wary glance toward the western wall where the compass needle was pointing. Enticed by the old man's cryptic words, Leo walked over to the western wall, following the precise trajectory of the spinning compass needle, and pushed his hands against the rotting drywall until the fragile plaster cracked open under his weight, revealing a hidden, hollow cavity within the framework. Reaching deep into the dark space between the wooden studs, his fingers brushed against a cold, smooth object. And with a hard tug, he pulled out a heavy cylinder made of solid polished copper, its surface completely etched with intricate, swirling geometrical maps that perfectly matched the layout of the town's underground waterways. Before Silas could even speak, Leo noticed a small dial at the base of the copper cylinder. And the moment his thumb accidentally rotated the dial 3 clicks to the right, a loud metallic click echoed from the center of the room, and the heavy iron hatch beneath the floorboards began to slowly, smoothly slide open on its own, revealing a flight of stone steps leading straight down into a glowing, luminescent subterranean cavern. Silas gasped as the ancient stone steps ground open, the faint blue luminescence from below casting long skeletal shadows across the ruined shack's walls, while the storm outside howled against the fragile rafters. Leo didn't hesitate, driven by a mixture of adrenaline and the desperate need for answers. He stepped onto the cold stone, the copper cylinder still humming softly in his grip as the brass compass needle spun frantically in all directions. Silas caught him by the shoulder, his grip like an iron vise, whispering that the cavern had been sealed since the Great Flood of 1920, when the town's founding families supposedly buried their darkest secrets to protect their wealth. Before the old man could pull him back, a sharp, echoing snap reverberated from the woods outside, the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery moving through the underbrush, signaling that Mayor Kellner hadn't waited for the morning to launch his retaliation. Peering through a crack in the boarded window, Silas cursed under his breath as the glaring headlights of a county bulldozer pierced the tree line, accompanied by 3 men carrying heavy chains and crowbars, determined to level the property under the guise of an emergency safety demolition. With their escape route blocked and the bulldozer's engine roaring closer by the second, Silas slammed the hidden drywall panel shut, grabbed his heavy toolbox, and shoved Leo toward the descending stone stairs, plunging both of them into the glowing subterranean chamber, just as the shack's front porch collapsed under a massive iron blow above. The heavy iron hatch smoothly slid shut over their heads with a definitive click, cutting off the chaos of the surface world and leaving them trapped in a vast, vaulted workshop built entirely into the solid granite bedrock beneath the valley. Leo stumbled at the bottom of the stairs, his flashlight beam revealing rows of pristine, grease-coated brass machinery, massive water valves, and walls lined with slate chalkboards covered in complex hydraulic equations written in an elegant, vanished hand. In the center of the chamber sat a massive circular iron table, holding a sprawling, three-dimensional mechanical model of Blackwood, its tiny brass buildings and copper rivers perfectly aligned with a real geography above. As Silas marveled at the impossible scale of the underground facility, Leo approached the mechanical Sarban and noticed a hollow, cylindrical slot right at the center of the town square model, perfectly matching the dimensions of the copper cylinder he had just pulled from the wall. Just as he prepared to insert the cylinder, a deep, ominous groan vibrated through the stone walls, and a thin stream of murky, foul-smelling brown water began leaking from a massive pressure valve near the ceiling, splashing onto the iron table and corroding the polished brass miniature buildings instantly. Silas rushed to the valve, frantically turning an iron wheel to stop the leak, but the metal snapped in his hands, releasing a high-pressure hiss of toxic grey sludge that began rapidly filling the lower trenches of the workshop floor. Leo, this isn't just an old workshop. It's the central pressure regulator for the entire valley's aquifer, and someone on the surface has intentionally sabotaged the main intake gates to flood us out, Silas shouted over the rising roar of the water, his boots already submerged in the toxic slurry. Leo looked from the breaking valve to the copper cylinder in his hand, realizing that the mechanical model wasn't just a map. It was a living control interface that his family had built to protect the town from the very greed that was now trying to destroy it. With the water rising to his waist and the air growing thin, Leo thrust the copper cylinder into the central slot of the model town square, turning the dial until it locked into place, causing a blinding flash of silver light to ripple through the mechanical rivers as a hidden door in the granite wall behind them suddenly violently breached open, revealing an even deeper, darker tunnel, filled with the sound of ticking clocks. A rush of trapped air whistled past Leo's ears as Silas hauled him through the newly breached granite doorway, their boots splashing heavily into a narrow, stone-walled corridor echoing with an eerie, symphonic chorus of hundreds of ticking clocks. Behind them, the toxic grey sludge slammed against the threshold of the hidden door. But a massive steel grate automatically crashed down from the lintel, filtering the worst of the debris while allowing only a steady, harmless stream of clear water to flow along a groove in the center of the tunnel floor. Wiping the filthy moisture from his brow, Leo shone his flickering flashlight down the passage, revealing that the walls were completely lined with intricate wooden and brass pendulum clocks of all shapes and sizes, their rhythmic ticks perfectly synchronized to create the hypnotic, pulsing heartbeat that vibrated through the deep bedrock. Silas examined the nearest clock, his weathered fingers tracing a small engraved brass plate hidden beneath the pendulum bob that read, Blackwood Aquifer Deficit Ledger, 1947. Realizing with a look of growing horror that these weren't timepieces at all, but highly advanced mechanical flow meters, tracking every single drop of water stolen or diverted from the town's underground reserves over the past century. As they moved deeper into the reverberating vault, the constant ticking suddenly grew chaotic. Several gears grinding violently as 3 large clocks on the left wall shattered into fragments of glass and brass springs. Their pendulums seizing up completely as a muffled explosion from the surface world shook the entire tunnel network. Kellner's bulldozer just hit the main structural cap above us, Silas growled, adjusting his grip on his iron crowbar as dust rained down on his shoulders. If he ruptures the primary pressure dome before we override the system, the entire northern valley will sink into a sinkhole by morning. And he'll blame it on a natural gas pocket to collect the federal disaster insurance. Determined to stop the destruction, Leo sprinted toward a brighter light at the end of the corridor, bursting into a small, circular observatory where a single, massive blast cylinder stood filled with thousands of tiny, glowing blue crystals that pulsed in perfect rhythm with the surviving clocks. Beside the crystalline pillar sat a rusted iron desk, its surface covered in loose-leaf blueprints and a heavy leather-bound ledger that bore his own mother's maiden name, Vance, embossed in fading gold leaf across the spine. Before Leo could open the book, a sharp metallic hiss filled the chamber as a hidden ventilation shaft near the ceiling purred to life. But instead of fresh air, it began pumping a dense, yellow-tinged industrial gas into the small room, causing Silas to immediately cough violently and collapse onto his knees as the toxic fumes rapidly thinned the oxygen. Gasping for breath, his vision blurring as the gas crept across the floor, Leo desperately lunged across the desk, his fingers clawing at the leather ledger until he found a hidden compartment built into the back cover, containing a heavy, 3-pronged iron key shaped like a phoenix wing. With his strength fading fast, and Silas slipping into unconsciousness behind him, Leo looked up to find the master control panel hidden behind the crystal cylinder, featuring 3 deeply recessed keyholes that required a simultaneous turn to vent the chamber. But as he reached out, he realized he only had 1 key, and less than 30 seconds before the toxic air claimed them both forever, fighting the blinding sting of the yellow gas in his eyes. Leo looked down at the single phoenix-winged key in his trembling hand, his lungs burning as Silas let out a weak, raspy groan on the floor beside him. Realizing he couldn't turn 3 keyholes at once, Leo's eyes darted back to the open Vance ledger on the desk, noticing a frantic handwritten note scribbled in the margins by his mother years ago. The heart of the mechanism does not require multiple hands, only the true weight of the architect's blood. With his vision fading into dark patches, Leo ignored the 3 keyholes entirely and slammed the heavy iron key directly into the center of the glass cylinder containing the pulsing blue crystals, using the last of his fading strength to twist the metal until the glass shattered with a deafening crack. Instantly, the glowing blue crystals poured out like a brilliant cascade of light, instantly absorbing the toxic yellow gas upon contact and venting a blast of pure, crisp oxygen into the chamber that revived Silas with a violent, gasping cough. As the old man stumbled to his feet, wiping the soot from his beard, the mechanical Saban in the outer room roared back to life, its tiny gears spinning so fast that the copper rivers began to glow with a strange electromagnetic heat. Suddenly, a hidden wall panel behind the broken cylinder slid away with a heavy grinding thud, revealing a reinforced steel vault containing a pristine, decades-old leather briefcase and a framed photograph of a young, smiling woman holding a baby boy. Leo himself standing right in front of the very shack he had just bought for $5. Leo rushed forward and flipped open the brass latches of the briefcase, finding it filled not with gold or cash, but with hundreds of neatly organized, certified land deeds and historical municipal bonds dating back to 1888, all bearing the official seal of the United States Treasury and the unmistakable signature of Arthur Vance. Silas leaned over his shoulder, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he read the top document aloud, his voice shaking. Leo, your family didn't just build the water system. Arthur Vance legally purchased the entire bedrock grid of Blackwood before the township was even incorporated. Meaning, this $5 shack gives you the absolute legal right to shut down every commercial property in the valley. Before Leo could even process the reality of his immense inheritance, the ceiling above them violently cracked open as a massive steel drill bit from Kellner's bulldozer punched right through the granite roof, missing Silas by mere inches and releasing a torrent of muddy surface water that began rapidly flooding the vault. Through the newly formed hole, the muffled, arrogant voice of Mayor Kellner echoed down into the cavern, shouting to his men to pour industrial concrete down the shaft to seal the abandoned well once and for all. Knowing they would be buried alive within minutes if the concrete filled the room, Leo grabbed the briefcase, jammed the Phoenix key into his pocket, and pointed to a narrow drainage pipe at the back of the vault that seemed to lead upward toward the town's old historic fountain in the center of the public square. Silas grabbed his crowbar to wedge the rusted drainage grate open, but as he pried the iron bars apart, the metal snapped with a sharp echo, trapping the old man's boot firmly beneath a falling granite block, just as a first wave of thick, wet concrete began pouring through the ceiling like a grey avalanche. The grey, viscous avalanche of industrial concrete, heavy with the scent of wet lime and aggregate, roared through the fractured ceiling, splattering onto the pristine brass instruments and creeping rapidly towards Silas's pinned boot as Leo lunged forward, throwing his entire weight against the massive granite block that held the old blacksmith trapped. "Go, Leo! Take the briefcase and climb up the drainage line before they seal this whole place into a tomb," Silas roared. His face flushed red as he frantically wedged his iron crowbar beneath the stone to create a fraction of an inch of leverage. Refusing to abandon the only man who had stood by him in his darkest hour, Leo jammed the heavy phoenix-winged key directly into a small mechanical slat he spotted on the side of the drainage grate, hoping against hope that his family's ancient engineering still held dominion over the bedrock. With a violent, metallic shriek, a hidden hydraulic piston hidden within the pipe wall fired, instantly shearing the granite block in half and releasing Silas's boot just as the rising concrete engulfed the old man's ankles. Silas crumbled upward into the narrow vertical drainage shaft, hoisting Leo up behind him by his collar, just as a massive wave of wet concrete filled the chamber below completely, sealing the van's vault in absolute darkness forever. They climbed frantically through the pitch-black, slippery pipe, the air growing thick with the scent of rust and old pennies, guided only by the distant, rhythmic thudding of heavy footsteps echoing from above. Moments later, Leo slammed his palms against a heavy iron grate at the top of the pipe, bursting out into the blinding neon glare of the Blackwood Town Square, tumbling onto the wet concrete right at the base of the historic, dry municipal fountain. The town square was chaotic, crowded with panicked citizens whispering in fear as foul brown sludge began bubbling up from every public drain. While Mayor Gerald Kellner stood on a temporary wooden stage under a large umbrella, loudly declaring through a megaphone that the town's water grid was permanently ruined by a natural disaster and that everyone needed to sign over their land titles immediately to receive emergency relocation funds. Seeing Leo and Silas emerge, covered in soot and grime from the fountain basin, Mayor Kellner's face turned an ugly, mottled purple, and he pointed a shaking finger at the two deputies standing near his stage, yelling, "Arrest those two for trespassing and vandalizing public infrastructure. They're trying to sabotage the emergency relief efforts." Before the deputies could take a single step toward the wet, shivering 14-year-old boy, Leo unzipped his frayed nylon backpack, stepped onto the rim of the historic fountain, and held up the pristine Vance land deeds and historical municipal bonds high above his head for the entire crowd to see. "The water grid isn't ruined by a disaster. Kellner, you sabotaged the intake valves to flood my land. But you didn't realize that my family legally owns the entire bedrock grid of this town." Leo's voice rang clear across the silent square, cutting through the heavy rain as a murmur of shock rippled through the gathering crowd. Old man Silas stepped up beside the boy, using his broad shoulders to block the advancing deputies as he pointed his iron crowbar at the mayor, shouting for the town clerk to examine the federal treasury seals on the documents Leo held. Just as the town clerk hesitantly stepped forward to take the leather portfolio, a loud, ominous cracking sound echoed from the northern ridge, and a massive sinkhole suddenly, violently opened up right beneath the mayor's parked luxury truck, swallowing the vehicle instantly and revealing that the water pressure beneath the town square was rising dangerously to its absolute breaking point. The violent shudder of the collapsing asphalt sent the panicked crowd screaming toward the edges of the town square as the mayor's luxury truck vanished into the churning mud of the new sinkhole, leaving a gaping fissure that hissed with highly pressurized geothermal steam. Mayor Gerald Kellner clutched the wooden podium to keep his balance, his face completely pale, as the town clerk, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Thorne, snatched a historical leather portfolio from Leo's hands and frantically flipped through the certified federal deeds under the shelter of her umbrella. "Mayor, these documents are absolutely authentic and completely ironclad," Evelyn announced over the roar of the steam, her voice amplified by the abandoned megaphone on the stage. "The Vance estate has a perpetual veto right over any municipal works in this sector, which means your emergency demolition order is completely illegal, and you have no authority to arrest this boy." The crowd erupted into furious shouts, turning their anger toward the stage as they realized they had been lied to, while the two county deputies slowly stepped back, refusing to touch Leo under the watchful, protective glare of Silas and his massive iron crowbar. Desperate and backed into a corner, Kellner lunged forward and snatched the megaphone back, his voice cracking with madness as he screamed, "It doesn't matter what a piece of old paper says, because if that pressure valve beneath the old shack isn't manual override locked in the next 5 minutes, the entire aquifer will rupture and blow this whole township off the map anyway." Leo looked at the ancient Phoenix Wind key still clutched in his fist, realizing that the mechanical Saban under the house hadn't just opened a vault. It was currently trying to vent the catastrophic pressure he had redirected when he broke the crystal cylinder. "Silas, the main overflow control isn't under the shack anymore. The drainage pipe we just climbed leads directly to the fountain's central pressure plug right beneath our feet," Leo shouted, pointing to a massive circular brass seal embedded in the floor of the dry fountain basin, which was already vibrating violently and leaking jets of scalding hot crystal clear water. Silas threw his weight against the brass seal with his crowbar. But the immense pressure from below jammed the mechanism, the metal groaning as the cracks in the surrounding concrete began to rapidly spread outward toward the historic town hall. Seeing his plan fall apart completely, Mayor Kellner tried to slip away through the panicked crowd toward his secondary getaway vehicle, but Evelyn Thorne and 3 burly town mechanics blocked his path, demanding he face the consequences of his sabotage. With the fountain basin cracking open and Silas losing his grip on the bending crowbar, Leo leaped into the vibrating basin, ignoring the scalding spray as he spotted a hidden triangular keyhole right in the center of the brass seal that perfectly matched the 3-pronged shape of his phoenix key. He jammed the key into the slot and turned it with all his might, but the rusted internal gears resisted. The immense force twisting the metal and cutting his palms until a brilliant, blinding beam of blue light suddenly shot straight up from the keyhole into the stormy night sky, causing the entire town square to go completely silent as a massive underground explosion rocked the foundation of Blackwood. The blinding beam of sapphire light that erupted from the historic fountain's core sliced through the midnight downpour, illuminating the terrified faces of the Blackwood townsfolk as the deep, rumbling explosion beneath the square abruptly ceased, replaced by a profound, rhythmic thumping that vibrated right through the soles of Leo's feet. For a breathless second, the entire town held its breath, until the massive brass seal beneath Leo's bleeding hands clicked with the force of an industrial vault door, completely locking the ancient overflow valve into place and reversing the pressure drop across the valley. Instantly, the foul, toxic brown sludge that had been bubbling from the public drains was sucked back down into the depths, and a magnificent, roaring plume of crystal-clear, sweet-tasting artesian water launched 70 feet into the air, cascading down over the concrete basin like a curtain of liquid diamonds. The crowd let out a collective deafening cheer, rushing forward to taste the pristine water, while Silas grabbed Leo by the shoulders and hoisted the exhausted 14-year-old boy out of the basin, just as Evelyn Thorne marched up the steps of the municipal stage with 2 state troopers who had just arrived in response to her emergency call. Mayor Gerald Kellner tried to blend into the shadows near the edge of the square, his expensive leather jacket drenched and ruined. Silas extended his iron crowbar, blocking the corrupt politician's escape route with a grim, uncompromising smile. Your emergency is over, Gerald, but your legal nightmare is just beginning. Evelyn Thorne barked through the megaphone, handing the state troopers the certified Vance ledger and the telemetry sheets that explicitly documented Kellner's secret industrial bypass valves. The troopers clicked heavy steel handcuffs around the mayor's wrists, leading him away toward a waiting cruiser as the town mechanics began turning the secondary valves to stabilize the residential lines. Just as the crowd began to surround Leo to offer their apologies and gratitude, a sharp metallic ping echoed from the fountain basin, where the phoenix-winged key had suddenly partially ejected from the slot, its ancient brass teeth now holding a tiny, tightly rolled parchment that had been pushed up from the deepest subterranean reservoir. Leo stepped forward and pulled the parchment free, unrolling it under Silas's flashlight to reveal a hand-drawn map of the county with a bold red circle marked right beneath his stepfather's current estate, accompanied by a chilling final note from Arthur Vance, dated 1922. The surface grid is secure, but the true wealth of the aquifer rests beneath the foundation of the man who betrays the bloodline. Leo looked up at Silas, his eyes narrowing as he realized that his $5 investment hadn't just saved the town from destruction. It had just handed him the exact blueprint to dismantle his stepfather's empire and reclaim every single acre that had been stolen from his mother. The crisp autumn morning wind of 2026 bit at Leo Vance's face as he stood on the gravel road leading to his stepfather's sprawling, gated estate at the crest of the northern ridge. The ancient parchment map clutched firmly in his hand alongside the heavy leather portfolio of original Vance deeds. Beside him stood Silas Vance, the old blacksmith's broad shoulders squared against the grey horizon, while Evelyn Thorne and 3 county surveyors followed close behind with heavy tripods and industrial ground-penetrating radar equipment. As they approached the grand iron gates, the front door of the mansion flew open, and Richard Vance, Leo's arrogant stepfather, marched down the driveway with a sneer on his face and a shotgun cradled in his arms, flanked by his private security detail. "Get off my property, you ungrateful little brat," Richard roared, pointing a trembling finger at Leo, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and sudden panic. As he noticed the county officials, "I threw you out once, and I'll have these guards dump you at the county line if you take one more step toward this house." Leo didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward and handed the master portfolio to Evelyn Thorne, who stepped past the armed guards with absolute legal authority, holding up a federal seizure warrant signed by the state Supreme Court just 3 hours prior. Richard Vance, according to the original 1888 bedrock deeds discovered beneath house number 9, your entire estate sits directly on top of the primary aquifer reservoir channel, which was illegally diverted by your grandfather to build this private lake and mansion, Evelyn announced calmly, her voice echoing off the brick facade of the house. Furthermore, a telemetry logs prove you have been secretly charging the neighboring townships for clean water while dumping industrial waste into the lower valley grid. Richard's face turned an ugly pale shade of green, and he ordered his guards to seize the documents. But Silas stepped forward, planting his heavy iron crowbar into the gravel with a thunderous thud that made the security team instantly freeze in their tracks. Suddenly, the industrial radar equipment began to beep violently, the digital display flashing red as the ground beneath the grand driveway began to violently shudder and groan under the immense weight of the shifting subterranean waters. From the center of Richard's pristine artificial private lake, a massive whirlpool opened up with a deafening roar, sucking the docks, the luxury boats, and thousands of gallons of stolen water down into the earth as the ancient Vance valve system below automatically opened to reclaim the valley's true supply. The concrete foundation of the mansion began to crack open right down the middle, the expensive brickwork buckling and crumbling into the emerging sinkhole as the guards threw down their weapons and fled for safety down the ridge. Richard fell to his knees in the dirt, clutching a handful of gravel, as he watched his entire stolen empire literally collapse into the earth. Realizing that the 14-year-old boy he had thrown out into the midnight rain now legally owned every single square inch of the land beneath his feet. Leo looked down at the ruined man who had broken his mother's heart. His expression calm but unyielding as he turned his back on the destruction, instructing the county surveyors to begin redirecting the pure artesian water back toward the public municipal grid where it belonged. 4 years had passed since the ground violently reclaimed the northern ridge, and on a golden, crisp November afternoon in 2026, 18-year-old Leo Vance stood on the beautifully restored timber balcony of house number 9, looking out over a transformed Blackwood Valley. The charred, broken shack he had purchased for a single $5 bill was now a magnificent 2-story stone oak community center. Its foundations reinforced with the very granite that guarded the ancient Vez aquifer below. Down in the town square, the historic municipal fountain pulsed with crystal clear water, drawing hundreds of families who now enjoyed free, pristine utility access thanks to the ironclad Vance Trust that Leo and Evelyn Thorne had established. Old man Silas Vance walked out onto the balcony, his beard fully grey, but his eyes brighter than ever, carrying a newly forged copper plaque that bore the names of Arthur and Leo Vance, the twin architects who had saved the town from its own greed. "We just finished checking the pressure dome meters in the lower cavern, Leo," Silas said, placing a heavy, proud hand on the young man's shoulder. "The automated filtration grid is perfectly stable, and the state treasury officially cleared the final historic municipal bonds this morning, making the trust completely self-sustaining for the next 2 centuries. Leo smiled, his fingers tracing the smooth brass face of his grandfather's old pocket compass, which now sat mounted inside the glass case on the balcony railing. Its needle permanently and peacefully locked due north at last. Suddenly, the gravel driveway crunched below, and a beat-up dusty sedan pulled up to the gates, revealing Richard Vance stepping out of the vehicle. His clothes faded and his posture entirely broken after serving his sentence for industrial contamination. The former tycoon walked hesitantly toward the porch, clutching a small, tarnished silver ring that had once belonged to Leo's mother. Whispering to the security guard that he only wanted to return the family heirloom to the boy he had cruelly evicted into the midnight rain. Leo walked down the steps, meeting his stepfather's hollow gaze with absolute calm, refusing to take the ring, but instead pointing toward the public water station at the front of the property, where anyone, regardless of their past, could drink for free. "Keep the ring to remember her by, Richard, because the Vance legacy doesn't build itself from revenge or wars anymore," Leo said softly, his voice echoing with the mature strength of a true leader. "My $5 bought this town its survival, and as long as I stand here, the water will flow for the righteous and the broken alike." As Richard slowly drove away into the autumn shadows, the entire town council, led by Evelyn Thorne, arrived at the gates with a massive crowd of citizens holding banners to celebrate the grand opening of the Vance Heritage Reserve, their cheers drowning out the last echoes of the old town's dark history. Leo looked up into the clear blue sky as the sun began to set behind the ridge, realizing that the terrifying journey that began with an unfair eviction and a desperate bid at a smoky auction had finally brought him home, cementing a legacy that would shield the people of Blackwood for generations to come. The sun dipped below the Ohio Ridge, painting the sky in deep hues of amber and violet, as the cheering of the Blackwood citizens slowly gave way to a warm, humming silence. Standing beside the grand fountain that now defined his family's legacy, Leo Vance took a deep breath of the crisp evening air, looking down at his hands no longer stained with the soot of a burned shack, but callous from the honest labor of rebuilding a town from its bedrock up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out that original stamped $5 deed, now framed in polished copper by Silas's own hands. A small piece of paper that had once been mocked as a fool's gamble, but had ultimately rewritten the fate of thousands. The true victory wasn't the immense wealth or the vast grid of land now legally under his name. It was the quiet, undeniable restoration of justice for a bloodline that had been pushed into the shadows for over a century. Looking out at the families gathering around the water station, laughing and sharing stories under the glow of the newly installed street lamps, Neil realized that the cycle of cruelty had finally been broken, replaced by a living monument of survival and grace. He had walked into this valley 4 years ago as a broken outcast with nothing but a frozen jacket and a prayer. But tonight, he stood as the architect of its future, fully knowing that what was once buried in the deepest dark had finally brought the entire town into the light.